Hello everyone, Karnasa here, and welcome back to Kerbal Gets Real Redux. In this episode, we are going to break, smash, tear apart, destroy, and completely ruin everything you ever thought about aerodynamics and physics in general. And that's because the planes in this episode, well, you'll have to keep watching to find out exactly what is wrong with them. And trust me, it's a lot. It doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense. But anyway, the year is 1953, there's a program to finish, and of course there's aerodynamics to completely break. Well, once again we start at the Space Center, because I swear Programs and Launch Complexes update is literally all spent at the Space Center, really. There's a lot of micromanagement. It's a lot more in-depth and complicated than old legacy RP1. Anyway, I have a Thunderbolt III upcoming, and all I'm going to be doing at the Space Center at the start of this episode is picking up the final low space film return contract. I'm fairly sure the Thunderbolt III is perfectly capable of completing that. The next major tech that I am waiting to unlock is going to be early science, which currently will come around in April. That is going to be an incredibly important technology for me to unlock because it contains the advanced biological capsule. Now, that doesn't really sound all that exciting when I say that, but it is something that is required for me to fly to complete the first program. And completing the first program, well, that's pretty pivotal to this career because I need to have completed that first before unlocking artificial satellite contracts. And as soon as I pick that up, well, that's going to be a lot more money in the bank. Okay, on to the first launch of 1953, a Thunderbolt III, and basically, this is improved in every way possible from the Thunderbolt II that I was launching in the last episode. You may have noticed when it was sat on the launch pad, it had almost 4,000 meters per second of delta V in it. That's more than capable of achieving the final camera contract, and the reason why I have this much delta V is the tanks are upgraded. They are much better, much lighter than ever before, and the engine has also been upgraded too, and I'm fairly certain I am overburning the RD101 that I am using for this design. It might be an RD101, it might still be an RD100, I can't actually remember. I filmed this footage such a long time ago. This is the problem when you start filming things and say you're going to edit it all at one go and then try and release them weekly, because I filmed this now about 5 weeks ago, I want to say, so it's probably not even up to date RP1 anymore. But as the episodes dip into the 60s, which is currently where I am in my save at the start of 1965, yes, I have filmed quite a lot, it is going to take longer and longer to edit these videos, so I wanted to get a bit of a head start so that I didn't have any lapses in this weekly schedule that I'm trying to go for. I would quite like to keep having these come out every Sunday, so you've got something to look forward to on Sunday if you're really looking forward to one of my videos. I don't know. One person out there might be thinking, oh, it's a Sunday, that means it's the next Kerbal Gets Real Redux episode. Maybe not even one person. Maybe my mum. That way she knows that I've actually been doing something with my wing. I'm not sure. Maybe some people are excited that I am trying to schedule these out, coming out every Sunday, and that it is something that is regularly. But anyway, the RD100 burns to completion. It's great. It's getting quite reliable now. And it would really be quite nice if I went ahead and used the RD180 or 170 series of engines once I started unlocking orbital rocketry technology to use the test flight data that I've gained from this engine and push it forward and make those more reliable than, say, switching over to the American engines when I get to orbital rocketry. But do I do that? Absolutely not, because I'm too much of a cheapskate and I did not have enough money to unlock the rather costly Soviet orbital engines. I really should try using them at some point. Well, the first launch of this episode was a complete success. No failures whatsoever. Test flight did not rear its ugly head and screw me royally. However, now, for this section of the Space Center bit, I was really struggling during editing to actually think what on earth I was going to show you, because the one problem that I was really running into was designing the Thunderbolt that would actually complete that advanced suborbital contract. I went in and out and in and out and in and out of the vehicle assembly building about 10 times, getting this right. Eventually what I did was I took the original design of the Thunderbolt III, replaced the film camera at the top with an advanced biological capsule, and then I found out that I needed to place in some sounding payload for this contract as well. Originally, my design was going to use a 1.5 meter diameter high pressure tank at the top, which would fit within the fairing. However, this would have cost an awful lot to tool, and I really did not have the money to do that. So instead of doing that, I created 4 smaller high pressure tanks that fit nicely around the advanced biological capsule, and these smaller tanks were the same diameter as the Blue Sky tanks. That means I don't need to be spending a huge amount of money on those high pressure pressure tanked, because I have already tooled that diameter. Diameter tooling in programs and launch complexes is still very expensive, as it always was in legacy RP1, so if I can use the same diameter for a design that I have previously used, well, you can be sure that I'm definitely going to be doing that. Aside from designing that rocket over and over again, whilst I was at the Space Center, I tried to finally balance the amount of engineers that were staffed at the Thunderbolt complex. Because I'm not going to be unlocking the science required until April, I wanted to make sure that I didn't build the next Thunderbolt before April. This way I can save on a little bit of funding and get a little bit more money back, because idle engineers do not cost as much to run as ones that are active at a launch complex. In fact, I'm fairly sure they don't cost anything. So I will be using this technique quite a few times over the course of this series to try and recoup some of my costs if I possibly can. In this time, I also pick up the first advanced biological suborbital experiment, which, as mentioned, is the capstone for this program. As soon as I complete that, I can finish it, and hopefully I will finish it with some time to spare, which will give me quite a hefty reputation boost. Then once again, it's just managing time warp until April, making sure that I pour any excess money into my research and development teams. And by the 8th, the research is done, and I have 160 researchers, almost double my engineers. That number is only going to get bigger. I know in older versions of RP1, you really wanted to pour as much money into your science points as possible, and having over double the amount of science points as build points, as they were called back in the day, was kind of a good way to get a step ahead. Where I am in this save at the moment, I'm not sure if this is exactly the right route, as I am constantly running into money problems, and there are probably better ways of maybe getting a few faster times than I did. But I guess maybe I can try that in a future run, or whenever Kerbal Gets Real Redux comes around. But maybe I can try out some different strategies in a future run, and one thing that I have not been doing with this series is streaming it. As I've mentioned, I am much further in this save than the current content that is coming out. I'm in 1965, so if I did a stream on this, it would kind of be, well, massive spoilers. One thing I am considering doing though is maybe streaming a separate P&LC campaign. I do want to get back into streaming, it's just honestly finding something worthwhile and interesting to stream. I don't want to just be streaming anything. I need to have something that people would actually want to watch. So if you like the thought of a separate campaign done entirely on stream, let me know down in the comments and I might see if I can start getting that done. Of course, when important milestones come up in For All Kerbal Kind as well, I most certainly will be streaming those too. In fact, I think one stream that I want to do for that quite soon will be building Karoo. I have started it, but I haven't really gotten that far with it, so it's definitely something that I could show on a live stream if people would be interested in seeing me plopping down Kerbal constructs buildings and trying to make it look pretty cool. Anyway, back to the mission at hand. I feel like I kind of got a little bit carried away there with talking about different things. Thunderbolt 3 too, with the biological sample, and it was a complete success. I did manage to get a speed of 2,200 meters per second at 140 kilometers of altitude, going straight up. Yeah, I simulated this quite a few times, and if I tried to do a turn, well, unfortunately, due to drag, air resistance, all that kind of horrible stuff, which you don't really want to be dealing with when you're launching a rocket, it got in the way and I was unable to get the speeds required to complete the contract whilst I was testing this out in simulations. So the answer was just to launch it straight up, and that more than succeeded, although it was pretty close. I was going about 2,250 meters per second by the time I got into space. 50 meters per second of being overbuilt, clearly, and not me very, very worriedly looking at it thinking, is it going to make it? Will it make it, or am I going to have to launch another one of these? And obviously these do take quite a while to build, especially with the advanced biological payload on it, because that costs quite a fair chunk of money, which obviously adds more to the build time. The parachutes on the final stage did deploy though, and I was able to successfully bring this back down to Earth, and finally able to complete the first program of the series. One thing that you may have noticed is that for these early launches, I am looking either straight up or straight down, and that's because I am using RSS Reborn by Ballistic Fox. At this point, whilst I was using this, if I looked at the horizon at all, my frames died. They just gave up. My PC could not handle it, even with a 13th gen i9, a 3070 Ti, and 64 gigabytes of RAM, it just died. It could not deal with the amazing graphics provided by RSS Reborn. However, later on in this series, series, I do find a workaround that actually makes my frames go up quite dramatically. All I had to do was turn textures to half res in-game. Well, you might think that's gonna make the textures look really rubbish, but it really doesn't change an awful lot, at least not that I've noticed anyway. Everything still looks pretty amazing. Really, the only thing that I've noticed that turning those down is some of the icons on the toolbar menu do get a little bit fuzzy. The rest of the game looks perfect. In fact, the rest of the game looks amazing with the volumetric clouds and the really high resolution textures from Ballistic Fox. Later on in this series, I do swap to the 64K textures and it looks amazing. Honestly, it looks fantastic. So yeah, a bit of a PSA about RSS Reborn. If you want to play with it, turn your textures down to half res. Anyway now, back to the episode. With the completion of the first advanced suborbital biological experiment contract, that is really a mouthful, I was finally able to finish the first program. And doing so quite a few years early netted me an additional 164 reputation. Before completing the program, I was already at the max subsidy. And something that was pointed out to me last episode is that the subsidy that you get from reputation is only enough to cover your staff and facilities. It won't gain you any additional money. That being said, my staffing and facilities have always cost me more than that subsidy can provide. I am fully reliant upon the program subsidy to keep me afloat. Up next though is picking the first satellite program, and I have two choices, light or heavy satellites. Heavy satellites will give me a lot more money, so I'm gonna go for that. It does mean that I need to build a much heavier launch vehicle, although my reasoning in going into this is I will need heavier launch vehicles down the line if I want to send larger payloads to low Earth orbit, which I definitely am going to be doing anyway, so it really only makes sense to me to pick up the heavier one for something that I will use a lot of later on, and it will also get me more money. Yeah, it seems like a bit of a no-brainer choice that. Going back to the Space Center screen, I eagerly checked my daily funding, and having now got 170 researchers, which are quite costly, my daily funding has increased 12 times up to 700 a day. Yeah, this is why I wanted to get that program as soon as possible, because it's just a ridiculous amount more funding. It's really night and day, the difference that you get from those first suborbital programs to what you get as soon as you start aiming to go orbital. Next on the agenda though was putting all of that newfound funding into researchers whilst I waited for the Supersonic flight tech node to be finished. That node is going to really help with the X-Plane program, but it won't be quite enough to finish it. I actually think I made a bit of a mistake here, because whilst waiting for this tech to be unlocked, I wasn't doing anything. Ideally, what I should have done was probably start working on my heavy launch pad. However, I didn't really want to design the rocket at the time, if I'm perfectly honest. It was a lot of brain power, and I was trying to caveman it as much as possible. But this was a mistake. I should have done that, and it would have meant that that would have been built a bit quicker. Alternatively, I could have worked on a lighter launcher, which is something that I will be doing by the end of this episode, that will use the Thunderbolt pad, and that will be more than capable of achieving first orbit, but it won't be able to lift a 1-ton scientific payload. However, by the time that supersonic flight is researched, I have gone up to 300 researchers, which gets me just shy of 19 science a year. With supersonic science unlocked though, I went away and designed my first, hopefully, Mach 2 capable plane, which I have dubbed the Sapphire, and that's only because it uses the Sapphire engine. I thought, what better way of calling this plane? But once again, that's going to take a little while to be built, so we're not going to be seeing that until September of 1953. Last year there were loads of launches. This year, maybe not quite so many. Another mistake I do here as well, I buy the upgrade for mission control. My thought process for this was, well, I want to be able to unlock more contracts, but realistically the benefit of upgrading mission control is that it allows you to use maneuvers. This is something that I'm not going to need until I start doing lunar impactors, and it is costing me quite a bit of money a day in order to get that built, which realistically could be better spent elsewhere. Next up is just a quick trip into mission control to pick up an optional supersonic contract to gain a bit more confidence. I did spend it all unlocking heavy satellites at breakneck speed before strapping George Edwards onto a new, untried, untested supersonic plane. Who am I kidding? I did test it, but George doesn't need to know that. but it's never been flown before. Okay, so now at the first launch in the latter half of 1953, and I do unfortunately have to tell you, there are going to be no more rocket launches this year. Having picked up orbital contracts now, well, I don't really have the technology to achieve that yet. So what better time to start trying to farm some of the optional X-plane contracts? First up, high supersonic speeds using the newly designed XPT2 SS Sapphire. That is a bit of a mouthful, but it's the X-plane test supersonic Sapphire. I did already mention that I am using the Sapphire engines for this, hence the name Sapphire. Clearly, once again, my naming brilliance knows no bounds. Now, as an additional extra on this supersonic plane, I have included supersonic cruise science. Theoretically, if I can get this plane going faster than 450 meters per second above 10 kilometers in altitude, well, there is a lot more science that I am able to pick up. I did mention at the end of the last episode that I am very quickly running out of science that I can achieve with both the Blue Sky and Thunderbolt rockets, and well, yeah, they're not going to be flying anytime soon to get that last little bit, so I need to get some extra science from somewhere. During tests, this plane was perfectly capable of going faster than 450 meters per second. However, when it came to flying it for real, it really struggled. In fact, it was so bad that I could barely even get it above 400 meters per second for the contract that I'd picked up, and really the only way that I could get it to go that fast was to put it into a bit of a dive. This clearly wasn't going to work, and I was scratching my head wondering why on earth did this work in simulations but didn't work when I flew it for real. And I think I found the culprit. You may have noticed earlier, the procedural tanks that hold this plane together aren't quite correctly aligned. When it's stationary on the runway and when the landing gear are deployed, they do line up. But for some reason, whenever I retracted the gear, it pushed the procedural parts out of place. I never figured it out on this flight, but a later flight which had the same problem, I found that if I lowered and raised the gear, for some reason, it made my speed go up dramatically. I'm not entirely sure where this bug came from, but it was a tad annoying, especially as, yes, I'm now not able to complete the contract that I picked up, and I have now just designed a plane that is incapable of doing anything extra for me. It can't get any new science, it can't complete contracts, and I spent a lot of money tooling and building this. This was a bit of a disaster. Not to be too disheartened though, I went straight back into the spaceplane hangar and made a couple of edits that made it appear to be a little faster when I simulated it, but as mentioned, when I simulated it before, it was speedy anyway. But that gives me the perfect opportunity to sit around doing absolutely nothing again. Yes, I really should be doing something with this space program, but all I am doing right now is pouring all available money into my researchers. I really need to research things fast if I am going to complete that artificial satellite program in time. Remember, my deadline is 1957 and there are a lot of techs that I need to pick up before I'm able to complete that. Now up to 380 scientists, I am getting almost 27 science done a year, so hopefully that should put me in a good position. It is also rather costly, but once again, some of that money is going towards my research unlocks, which I am definitely going to be using when I tool my first heavy orbital rocket. I mean, I say I'm sat around doing nothing, but realistically, I'm waiting for tech to be unlocked, which in hindsight was not the best of ideas because I very nearly have the technology I need to achieve orbit already. You're gonna see my first orbital design very shortly after this launch, and it really does not require a lot at all. It does, however, require the second material sciences node, which does take a little while to unlock, and I won't unlock that until the end of 1953. But anyway, to the flight at hand now, and I have turned the Sapphire into a Wish variant of the SR-71. Yeah, I don't really know why moving the engines down the wings worked or helped, but apparently it did, and that's not the only edits that I've made to this plane. I have changed the intakes, and I have also changed the engines on the end. This did cost me an extra 2,500 funds, however, the J57 is a lot more powerful than the Sapphire engines that I was using before, and it has an afterburner. These two qualities mean that it goes very fast. It is unable to quite get to Mach 2, but it is so much faster than the first iteration of this supersonic plane. That being said though, the weird procedural parts bug is still present. It didn't go away. In fact, it was only exacerbated by this design. I think having the landing gears on tanks on the wings really did a number on this. As you can see, see, those intakes are wildly out of place. Now, normally in the stock aerodynamic system, that wouldn't necessarily matter because it's based upon what nodes you put things on. However, with FAR, which tries to model realistic aerodynamics, I'm fairly sure that's completely different, and it actually models drag based on the profile of the plane that you are flying. If that's the case, and like I said, I'm fairly sure it is, having those intakes move that far away and having the face of that procedural tank being completely uncovered is going to really affect my drag for this plane, which is something that I really don't want to happen considering this is supposed to be a plane that gets to ridiculous supersonic speeds. Yeah, this bug is very annoying. It's something I've never ever come across before in all of my time playing KSP, and I would really like it to go. I will get some better plane designs later on in this series where this doesn't happen at all. I just would really like to know what's causing it. Maybe it's just a weird placement of the landing gears causing the tanks to be shifted out of position. That's the only thing I can really think of. Also, it did make getting a thumbnail for this video rather difficult considering how preposterous this looks. I still might use it though. I'm not entirely sure what I am going to go for the thumbnail picture yet, but I feel like this is a contender. This is up there with maybe what this video is all about. Everything just goes wrong. There have been many mistakes in this video. I have done things that I shouldn't have done. I've waited around for too long. The plane just went wrong. I don't think I've had a test flight failure yet though, so I can count my blessings in that regard. But yeah, there was a lot of self-inflicted failure this episode, and really maybe I should be calling this series How Not to RP1, because I seem to be doing everything wrong that I can. Although I can't do that because a very good friend of mine, Cosmonaut Crash, has just started his own series, How Not to RP1, which you can find on YouTube here, and I'll put a card to his channel now. And I thought I was going a bit mad uploading a new episode every week of programs and launch complexes. Cosmo is uploading an episode every single day until Christmas. He does have quite a backlog of streams that he's going through, but yes, I couldn't do that myself. I would die. But go check him out. He's a really, really good streamer on Twitch as well, and I do pop into his streams quite frequently. Anyway, you may have seen me deplete the science on this and complete the contract that I had, and then fly straight over the Cape and head towards the other side of Florida. And you might think, what on earth are you doing? Well, I was also thinking, what on earth am I doing whilst I was rewatching back this footage? But I looked at it a little closer, and I realised what I was doing was seeing if this plane was capable of completing the stratospheric contract. That was a contract that did plague me, and unfortunately this plane is unable to do it. I was also doing a few speed tests to see just how fast this plane can go. And yeah, it turns out it can quite comfortably get over 500 meters per second, even with the dodgy, weird, janky aerodynamics that this plane is displaying. Now, that's not quite enough to do the Mach 2 contract, unfortunately, but it does mean that I can pick up a few extra supersonic contracts, which is going to be really nice for me to gain a little bit more confidence and reputation. Not that I really need that at the moment. It has, however, been flying for quite some time, and it's still got about a third of its fuel tank left, so I could definitely remove some of that and make it maybe go a little bit faster or a little bit higher. But to be honest, I'm quite happy in the knowledge that I don't have to be running this thing on fumes and that I can easily get back to the Space Center if I really needed to, which is exactly what we're going to be doing right now and attempting to land this. And George Edwards, being the excellent pilot she is, has nothing to worry about, and we safely touch down upon the shuttle runway. With all that speedy flying, I gained a few new science points, which means a trip into research and development to pick up 1956 to 57 orbital rocketry. This is a very important tech to pick up, because it's the tech node that contains the engines that the first real-life rockets used to get to orbit. And with my current rate of research, well, I'm going to be unlocking that in 1955, quite a bit ahead of schedule. This is very good. However, as I have now unlocked those engines, I thought it was high time that really I should be designing my first orbital vehicle. So I did, and here it is. Now, I'm not going to show the build of this because this took so many iterations and so much designing to actually get to a state where I was quite happy with it. But what I am going to show you is me building the pad, because I felt that that was important information for you to know. But yes, the Thunderbolt XPT-X will be my first orbital vehicle. Now, it's called that for a couple of reasons. The first stage is just a Thunderbolt. It is an RD101. I have not upgraded that at all. It is really basic bare bones tech. The second stage is an XLR, which is what I've been using on my XPT high altitude planes. These are both engines that I have used extensively, so I would quite like to think that they would be quite reliable. Reliability is of course a key factor because test flight is involved. The final couple of stages on this, which is what I need to wait for to be unlocked, is a couple of GCRC solid rockets, and I need to wait for 56 to 57 solid rockets in order to unlock that. However, that node is not gated behind the 10-point material science node, so I don't have to research something ridiculous in order to get that done for next year. I'm also not going to tool the rocket now because I'm not going to be able to start building this for at least 21 days according to the launch complex plans, but realistically it's going to be a little bit later than that anyway because I still do need to wait for that tech to unlock. And the more time I wait, the more research credits I'm going to get, and I would rather not be dipping into my actual funds in order to purchase the tooling for this vehicle. That would be quite silly. Back at the Space Center, with a little bit of shifting around of techs, I can get all of the technology unlocked by the 27th of April. And of course the launch complex is going to be built in only 21 days, so I do not have to worry about that at all. In fact, if I had the tech, I could start building these rockets in 1953. Unfortunately though, the tech is a little bit of a barrier. That's not to worry though, because before the end of the year is out, we are going to be flying that unaerodynamic monster again, this time with the aim of going faster than 500 meters per second in a plane that really should not work at all. I mean, you saw it in the last flight, it's really janky, but yet somehow it does seem to work. So I'm gonna absolutely use it until I can no longer gain anything more from it. So on the 17th of December, coming to the end of this year, and once again launching something in December, and this time a crude vehicle, really not my smartest of ideas, the XPT-002 Sapphire. Really should also name that something different now, considering I'm not using the Sapphire engines anymore, takes off yet again. I did already say what the purpose of this flight was about 30 seconds ago, but if you didn't catch that, we're going to be trying to go faster than 500 meters per second so that I can get all of the confidence and reputation that I could ever want. Well, not quite, but it will be a bit of a bonus to what I already do have, and I do want to be getting more confidence all the time because some of the programs later on are going to end up costing me an awful lot. This plane once again takes off like an absolute dream. I really have no struggles whatsoever flying this, considering just how broken and how bad it looks. I mean, look at it. It is so silly what has happened with this plane. But hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And as I mentioned in the previous flight of this can absolutely go faster than 500 meters per second and also still gain me quite a bit more science. Now, what I'm using to control this is atmospheric autopilot. It's got a great cruise flight controller setting where you can set what speed you want to be going to, and you can also set that you don't want it to move vertically at all, and that is one of the contract parameters. I am not allowed to go higher or lower than 10 meters per second of vertical speed change. So having something that will hold level flight and also maintain my speed is brilliant. Atmospheric autopilot, I'm fairly sure, comes bundled with RP1 Express install, so if you have just got a bog standard generic RP1 Express install, you will have this mod, and it makes flying planes really fun. The fly-by-wire setting on it as well is brilliant. Honestly, it turns flying planes from being a bit of a chore to something that is actually quite enjoyable. One thing it doesn't really do well though is maintaining speed, as you can see by the engines of this plane turning off and on as it tries to maintain 550 meters per second. Not ideal, but I was able to complete the contract anyway and gain a lot more science from this flight. Clearly at this point though, I still was not the best at designing planes because I had no flaps or spoilers on this, so slowing it down in order to run on the landway was going to be somewhat problematic. However, this didn't actually struggle all that much with it, and neither did the last flight of this exact same vehicle. Maybe it's something to do with the fact that it probably slows down quite quickly due to the fact that a big flat face is going to be causing huge amounts of drag. I have said it before, but don't worry, later on in the series my plane designs do get a lot better. They actually look like functional planes, and I did spend quite a bit more time on them, and some of them I am quite proud of. I think they look very good, and they look like planes that should actually be able to fly, at least in my small brain opinion. As I've said multiple times over the course of this series, I'm really not the person for planes. Go check out Calvin. George once again performs a flawless landing on the runway. I had nothing to worry about. I know that this plane was in very good hands. She's not had a single accident in this series yet, not even whilst waiting at the very long line for the toilets in the KSC. No, she is a great pilot, and I'm sure I will enjoy many more flights with her. Isn't that right? Absolutely. Nothing could possibly possibly go wrong? Well, another successful landing and another year is over, and I would like to say this episode was brought to you by the No Scripting Gang. Yes, I didn't script any of this episode whatsoever, and that is definitely not because I've been playing Lethal Company with N9 all week. I've really been enjoying that game. It's very, very fun, especially when you have 40 people in a lobby, and now that I've finished editing this and getting the voiceover done, I'm probably going to go play some more. I do quite like doing these unscripted though. It takes me less time to make the video, and it's a lot more in my old style, and I can do lots of ad-lib jokes because clearly I'm a very funny person. Alright, when you edit this, add loads of crickets at that point because that's a joke. Also, cut this bit out. No one wants to hear your edit notes. But anyway, going into 1954, we're going to have our first shot at getting to orbit with a Thunderbolt XPT that I showcased earlier on in this episode. I will go into a bit more detail in the next episode, but it's a 23-ton launch vehicle using some pretty basic tech. Overall, I was pretty pleased with the design. I still, however, do have to make my heavy launch vehicle, and that's going to take a little bit more brain power. Some say it could be compared to my own Odyssey. That's a great name for the vehicle. A big thanks to Y Mandarin, Darth Malachor, Moss Config, Mr. Bluestar, Ryan Miller, and the rest of my patrons and members for their continued support. I have been Carnassa, and I will see you later.